Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we are talking all about baby orchid plants. What orchids produce them, why, how do we obtain them, and how do we grow them? Orchid plantlets, aka Keikis, are a great way to propagate orchids which simply cannot be divided. As you may remember, last time we did talk about dividing orchids. Well, today we're still going to talk about propagation, but this time we're mainly going to focus on Phalaenopsis orchids and other monopodials. Today's episode, along with our entire Orchid Care for Beginners series, is sponsored by Repotme.com, who offers you everything you could possibly need to properly take care of your orchid, from media to fertilizer, pots, and all sorts of accessories. Some of the accessories that I will use in this care series and in today's video are provided by Repotme, so I will link you to their website down below in the description. Feel free to visit them at any time. So with that said, let's learn a little bit about what Keikis are and how do they look like. Generally, Keikis are produced by monopodial orchids, such as the Phalaenopsis and also the Vanda orchid, and they really are baby plants. They naturally occur on orchids and they are just another way of propagation besides seed propagation. A keiki is theoretically a clone of the mother plant. It will look identical because it is an extension of the very same plant. Therefore, these keikis can actually be separated from their mother plants and grown like a standalone plant. Of course, in the beginning they will be very tiny, but they will actually grow much faster than seedlings. Hence, you will have flowers from a keiki much sooner than you would from a seedling. There is a misconception going around that orchids will produce keikis when they're not happy, when they're in danger actually, as a defense mechanism. And while orchids can definitely try to propagate themselves through keikis if they suffer from crown rot or stem rot, it is not a rule that all orchids will produce keikis when they're stressed. In fact, there are species which are very prone to produce keikis even if they're very healthy. So the natural appearance of a keiki is nothing to worry about, it's something to look forward to actually. Generally speaking, sympodial orchids such as oncidiums, cattleyas, zygopetalums, even paphiopedilums, everything that produces bulbs or fans, they don't produce keikis. And this is because it's really easy for these orchids to propagate themselves naturally through division. Yes, in cultivation we divide orchids, but in nature, division can absolutely occur if the plant simply has a section which dies off. And along with seed propagation, for these orchids it's not so important to produce keikis as well, since Phalaenopsis and other monopodial orchids don't have a rhizome and structure is connected by this rhizome, it can't really naturally divide itself, so it produces keikis. As a side note, the new growths that sympodial orchids produce are not baby plants, they are part of the very same plant, so never ever try to remove immature new growths. They will most probably not make it because they're not equipped with everything they need to become a plant of their own. There are some orchids out there which do manage to combine the best of both worlds. They can propagate themselves through division but also through keikis. And here I have a dendrobium orchid and an epidendrum orchid, which is a terrestrial. They are both sympodials and they have a rhizome and separate structures in the forms of pseudobulbs, but they can also create baby plantlets on these canes which can be divided or actually removed and grown on their own. This being said, none of these rules are set in stone. You can always have surprises with orchids, and if you're lucky enough, once in a blue moon you can actually have an anomaly on a cattleya or oncidium and you might get a baby plant on top of the canes. Don't expect it to happen too often though. Depending on the type of orchid, keikis can appear in various locations on the plant. In the case of sympodial orchids, which don't produce flower spikes, like the Dendrobium nobile, the keikis can appear along the cane where flowers can appear as well. In the case of epidendrum orchids, which do produce flower spikes, you can have keikis along the canes, but also on the flower spike. Vandaceous orchids typically produce keikis somewhere along the stem. You will most likely not see a keiki form on the flower spike. Again, there might be an anomaly at some point, but generally speaking, keikis are these cute little fans that appear at the base of the stem typically. And in the case of Phalaenopsis orchids, keikis can appear on the actual flower spike or even on the axis of the orchid. We call those basal keikis, and apart from where they form, they are actually identical to spike keikis. Now, how do we obtain these keikis? Well, for the main part, they can actually happen naturally. The more orchids you have, the more you grow them, the more you are prone to having a keiki naturally without doing anything. However, depending on the orchid, there are a few things that we can do in order to promote keikis. For orchids which generally need a rest from fertilizer and regular watering, keiki production can be to some extent induced by continuing adequate conditions for vegetative growth. Regular watering, higher temperatures, and offering fertilizer will definitely increase your chances of obtaining keikis on a Dendrobium nobile, and not only species like Anosmum and Parisia as well, rather than flower spikes. But you have to really consider whether you want a nice bloom show or keikis. When it comes to Vandaceous orchids, which are worm growing and they don't take any type of break, inducing keikis is not so easy. However, the more proper culture we offer for these orchids, warmth, fertilizer, watering, the more prone they will be to naturally create keikis. An older Vanda is more prone to produce keikis than a younger Vanda, and also keep in mind there are species and varieties which are super prone to creating keikis, such as Neophoenicias and all of their hybrids. In fact, what I'm showing you here is a Neophoenicia hybrid. And you can see it's rather tiny, but already I have 2 keikis on this orchid, which makes it look so much better, much bushier. Bonus, these keikis will bloom together with the mother plant. When it comes to Phalaenopsis orchids, well, here's the fun part. Yes, we can obtain keikis naturally just by taking care of our orchid properly, or we can cheat and use growth hormone paste. We call it Keiki Paste or Keiki Grow Paste. This paste is what we use in order to obtain flower spike keikis on Phalaenopsis orchids, which otherwise wouldn't have produced them. So I'm going to show you how to use this paste and how I managed to obtain this keiki using Keiki Grow Paste. Now, Keiki Grow Paste is applied on one of the dormant nodes on the flower spikes. You can find these nodes just underneath the flowers. And the best moment to do this is when the flowers are completely dried. So cut the flower spike above the nodes, leave about 2 centimeters or 1 inch above the last node, then remove that little sheath that covers the node. We need the paste to go directly on the dormant bud. I'm using a bamboo skewer here, and I'm going to apply not a very generous amount, just enough to cover the entire bud, but I don't want to leave a very thick layer of paste there because that can lead to all sorts of anomalies. And that's it. Now, I did this orchid which has a terminal spike, but I also treated a node on a mini Phalaenopsis. This is a community pot. So in the same manner, I removed that leafy sheath that covers the dormant bud. And in this case, you can see the bud is really tiny. Don't worry, it's still going to work. And as a matter of fact, spoilers, this is the one that actually created a keiki. So in this case, I'm gonna apply Keiki Paste on top of the node to fully cover it. As you can see, I'm not leaving a big blob of the paste. And now we wait. And it can take a week or 2 until you start to see the bud swell and develop, but overall it can take up to a month or 2 until you see the keiki starting to form. So playing with Keiki Paste can be super fun if you have a lot of Phalaenopsis and you have the patience to wait for keikis. There are, however, a few things that I really want to share with you. First of all, do try and make sure that you respect the instructions. You will see that, at least for keiki grow, they do tell you which nodes are better to treat. Also, in my personal experience, treating orchids when temperatures are low, when they're prone to creating flower spikes, will actually give you mostly secondary flower spikes than keikis. So what I like to do is use Keiki Paste at the end of spring or summer, or whenever the orchid is done with her blooms and it's starting to create new leaves from the top of the crown. But if you're looking for keikis, I would highly recommend using this when your orchid naturally grows leaves, not in the autumn or winter when it naturally grows flower spikes. Also, always try to use healthy orchids. Remember that keikis are another structure that the plant needs to invest energy in. So if the mother orchid is not healthy, then the keiki probably won't make it, and the mother orchid will simply be drained. You are risking losing it. So only choose healthy orchids and don't overdo it. If you have a flower spike with 5 nodes, don't apply this thing to all 5 nodes, because it can happen that all of those nodes will start to produce something, either a keiki or a secondary spike, and that's a lot of stress and a lot of energy that the orchid needs to allocate to all of those nodes. Try 1 or 2 nodes per flower spike, and if ever an orchid shows signs of dehydration, even though it has roots, or simply does not look so healthy, just remove the flower spike altogether and give up the experiment. It's not worth losing the orchid, but if you just make sure the orchid is healthy to begin with and you don't overdo it, you shouldn't really run into issues. And it's just so fun to create keikis with Keiki Paste. Now, after a few months, the keiki will start to create roots. This is when we want to separate it. Separating a keiki without roots will not guarantee success. Most often than not, it will just die off. So when the keiki has 3 or 4 roots, which are a few centimeters or 2 inch long, then you can cut the stem right below the keiki. Afterwards, we can pot the keiki separately in orchid medium, find an appropriate sized pot, and just treat it like a normal orchid. We need to make sure that the roots receive a lot of air, so the medium needs to be very fluffy because they are, in essence, aerial. But also we need to water it every time the roots completely dry off. Since the keiki has no reserves, it will depend on us to provide the water. Depending, of course, on the case, keikis can actually take a year or 2 until they reach maturity or until they become big enough to bloom. So much faster than seedlings. But if you don't get blooms in the first year, don't panic. Most probably in your second year you will get a flower spike. Just treat the keiki just like a normal Phalaenopsis and everything should be okay. Similarly to Phalaenopsis orchids, keikis coming from dendrobiums or epidendrums should be removed when they have at least 4 or 5 roots, which are a few centimeters or an inch or 2 long. For the greatest chances of success, actually, a keiki should be left on the plant another year until it starts to produce a new growth of its own. That will make sure that the keiki will develop super fast into a standalone plant. But if you have a lot of keikis on your plant which you do need to remove, all you have to do to remove them is find a very thin cutter. This is one that I received from Repotme and I love using it. And just go very close to the mother cane and remove the keiki. Mind you, it's never a good idea to cut into the keiki. It's always a better idea to even make a little wound on the cane, because the cane will be perfectly fine. We can seal the wound, but if we manage to destroy the base of the keiki, then the keiki will completely wither off. Make sure that you are not actually cutting the roots. And we're almost done. And there we have it. We can now go ahead and pot this keiki into a pot of its own and make sure that the medium will not stay dry for long periods of time. Keikis don't have back bulbs to support their growth, so we need to make sure that water is provided regularly. As for sealing the cane, all we need is cinnamon powder, which I will apply directly to this area. And this will make sure that the area is completely sealed. In time, this cinnamon will create a pretty hard surface like a layer of bark. Cinnamon is actually grounded bark. And there we have it. The cane should be okay now and the keiki should grow beautifully. In case you want to separate a Vanda keiki or a Basil Phalaenopsis keiki, things are a little bit more complicated and usually you would need to unpot the orchid, especially in case the keiki does have roots of its own. We want to save those roots because it will help the keiki. So I have here a Vanda orchid. This will apply to Phalaenopsis as well. The keiki will be connected to the mother plant through a tiny little stem. So the first thing you can do is try to just pull the orchids apart. And you can see that in my case here, it would be really easy to just pull these orchids and separate the 2 stems. However, in some cases, it will not be so easy, so you will need a sharp pair of pruners. I suggest you go for something tiny, not a garden pruners or shears, because you need to make sure you are cutting the tiny little stem that connects the two plants. So with my trusty fiskars, I will go right at the connection point, which in my case is right here, and give a clean cut. And my two plants are separated. Make sure you are careful when untangling the roots. We want to preserve the roots, and here we are. This is the keiki separated, ready to be potted in a pot of its own. Just as a side note, the rules of division don't apply here. So we don't need to make sure that we have 3 fans per division, because each keiki is actually a fully functional plant. It is not a part of the very same plant, like in the case of sympodials. So separating keikis individually is perfectly fine. If I so desired, I could separate this keiki as well, and all of them would be just fine, but do always make sure that no matter the type of separation you make, the keiki has roots. If it doesn't have any type of root, it is still depending on the mother plant, and if at all possible, let it be on the mother plant until it produces at least 2 or 3 roots that you can work with. Recently, I had to divide a keiki from a dying mother plant, and in that case, of course, we need to prioritize the keiki, so I'll link it down below to the entire video if you're interested, but basically in that instance, you don't really care all that much about the mother plant since it's already gone. In that case, we prioritize the keiki and we make sure that we don't cut too close to the base of its stem. In those cases, I prefer to leave a little bit of the mother plant stem in order to save the keiki. I will link you down below in the description to a few instances that I've encountered along the years, so you see how I went about it, because each case is just a little bit different. And that is about it on obtaining keikis and caring for them. If you ever get your hands on Keiki Paste, do give it a go. It's really fun to play around with it. I tried to use it on sympodials for promoting new growth. Didn't really work, but with keikis, I did get results. Always remember that whenever we're playing with nature, we're not entirely sure what we're gonna get. They are little individuals after all, with their own little chemistry and hormonal balance, so you need to go through some trial and error, but whatever you do, do not stress out the mother plants. It's not worth it. Always prioritize them. You can always try to obtain keikis from the very same plant, but if you lose the plant, there will be no keikis, right? And as always, thank you so much Repot Me for sponsoring this entire series and providing many of the materials that I used in this video. Subscribe to my channel for more orchid videos, tutorials, experiments, updates, and other fun orchid subjects. If you wish to support the channel, do consider becoming a member or visit the merch store linked down below in the description. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. It's always nice to stay in touch there as well. And with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!